We're going to look at 7.06 in your notes, and the topic is tornadoes. The first thing we're going to describe is tornado formation. For tornadoes to form, we first need thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms, just like we had learned earlier in class on Monday. So let's list our first ingredients. For tornado formation, we need warm, moist air. Warm, moist air, that's maritime tropical, and remember that comes from the Gulf of Mexico. Cool, dry air, which is going to descend from the north, and that cool, dry air comes from Canada. And then the third ingredient would be warm, dry air. And the warm, dry air almost acts like a lid to this storm. You'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute. So tornado formation is really based on three air masses mixing. The first is the warm, moist, mixing with the cool, dry, and then the third is the warm, dry air. And in a minute, when we look at where these happen, you'll see why Tornado Alley is where it is. The formation itself of that funnel cloud is really kind of a tough concept to understand. Meteorologists are still learning how these develop. In fact, if they had a better understanding, they probably would develop better warning systems. But the first thing I want you to do is to take a look in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and you'll see what looks like a barrel or a cylinder rolling. That cylinder represents a column of air. And that column of air is rolling horizontally because at the upper altitudes, the upper heights, the wind is moving faster, and at the bottom it's moving slower. And that causes that column of air to spin horizontally. So if you can imagine, you get this rotation of air. But that's not a tornado. That is simply air moving horizontally. Remember that one of the ingredients for a tornado and a thunderstorm is warm, moist air that is rising. So I want you to imagine this cylinder that is spinning also starting to be picked up. And so if I extend my line, it starts to be picked up, and eventually it spirals upwards. And that is the genesis or the beginning, the formation of a thunderstorm, which becomes your supercell and eventually spawns the tornado. Now, where do these happen? Where do most tornadoes happen? If we look at the next screen, you can see the hot spot is Oklahoma and Texas. So right in this area here, that is your prime spot for tornadoes. Of course, we call that Tornado Alley. Oops, can't read that. Tornado Alley. Now, why is the alley located there? Why isn't it over Michigan? Why is it not over California? Remember the ingredients. We need maritime tropical. We need continental polar. And they meet there, but remember the third ingredient would be the continental tropical, which moves in from the west. Those three air masses mixing together are going to give you the ingredients for thunderstorms and ultimately severe thunderstorms, which could produce your tornadoes. So the reason the alley is here is because that is where all three air masses mix most frequently, and that's the where. Let's go back to the when, the season, so you can fill that in your notes. So explain when tornado season begins and ends. It begins usually in April. Usually in April. That doesn't mean it couldn't start earlier. It could start earlier. It ends usually into the late summer into the early fall. And the reason for the beginning of the season is that in April, that's when you start to get more of the maritime tropical and continental air masses mixing along with the continental tropical. The reason it's not in the winter is because in the winter you don't have very warm, moist air rising from the Gulf. The reason it happens in the spring is simply because that's when those air masses are mixing, and that's when you get a big difference in the air masses. So that's the reason for the season. It's not earlier because the warm air isn't really coming up from the Gulf yet. And if we move down one in your notes, describe why more tornadoes form in Tornado Alley. Remember, I just explained that. That's where all three air masses mix most easily. Next thing we'll talk about is how they're rated. Just like hurricanes, tornadoes get a rating scale from 1 to 5. And it used to be called the Fujita scale, named after a famous meteorologist, Dr. Ted Fujita. Now we've switched it a little bit, and now it's an enhanced Fujita scale. Still goes from 0 to 5, actually. But notice the wind speeds are a little bit different. And we're going to look on the side over here. This area is our enhanced Fujita scale. You don't need to copy this down, but a copy of this is on the back of your purple reference map that you've been using the last week or so. Notice the wind speeds are faster than hurricane wind speeds. One clear difference between hurricanes and tornadoes is the wind speed. Tornado wind speeds are much, much stronger. They can get over 200 miles per hour, sometimes even over 300 miles per hour, as you can see on the left-hand side of the chart. So please refer to your purple chart for that. The last thing we'll discuss is tornado safety. If this was a tornado coming nearby, you'd see there's quite a bit of debris, these little black objects. Those could be cars, houses, building pieces. So what do we need to know? First measure of safety is to recognize the difference between a watch and a warning. Tornado watch means you've got the right conditions. Remember earlier today in class on Monday we talked about that most of the time these are late afternoon storms. So if it's a hot, humid day and then towards the afternoon it cools off, you've got the ingredients for a possible thunderstorm leading to a tornado. Possible. Tornado watch is issued when the conditions are favorable. There doesn't need to be a tornado. Sometimes there never will be, but the conditions are favorable. If a tornado has been spotted either by radar or with a trained person spotting a tornado, then a warning is issued. At that point, if you're in the warning area, it's best to take cover. And I'm sure you've learned this before, but the safest places to be would be in the lowest interior room in your house. If you have a basement, that's the best place to be because you're protected on all sides by dirt and by solid earth. If you don't have a basement, if you're in an apartment or a flat, the interior room, closet, um, bathroom tub, things like that are going to be your safest spots. And that is tornado safety. Again, there's not much you can do to get away from the tornado. The worst thing you could do is probably try to outdrive it, outrun it. And you want to try to get to a place which is protected, as many walls and barriers between you and the outside as possible. Most of the time, tornado deaths are not caused by the wind, but by the debris that the wind is carrying. So things being thrown through windows. So that's why you want to have as many walls between you and the outside as possible. And that's tornado safety and mitigation.